The boardroom was deathly quiet. All eyes were on Tiffany, and for a split second, she felt like she could hear her heartbeat in her ears. But she wasn't afraid. Not anymore. She had worked too hard, fought too many battles to be scared now. No, she was ready. The room full of powerful white executives watched her. Some of them smug, some of them curious, all of them questioning if a black woman could truly pull this off, but Tiffany had already made her move. "Let me be clear," she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "I don't need your approval to make this deal happen." The silence that followed was deafening. And then, it hit. The sound of the email notification pinging through the room. She glanced down at her phone, an email from Marcus's family. The subject line was simple: investment opportunity, final decision. Tiffany's eyes narrowed. She already knew what was coming. They had been playing her the whole time. The family's name had been attached to this deal, but it wasn't about her. It had never been about her. It had been about their power, their empire, using her to leverage their control. But they hadn't seen this coming. She wasn't just a pawn in their game. She opened the email, her fingers trembling. It was worse than she thought. Marcus had made his choice. "We're going to pull the plug on the deal. It's not a good fit." A cold chill ran down her spine, but then something shifted. Tiffany smiled, and it wasn't the kind of smile that said she'd given up. It was the kind of smile that said this was far from over. The twist was coming, and it was going to change everything. In that moment, she made a decision. The game was on her terms now. She wasn't just going to win the deal. She was going to bring their empire down to its knees. The morning sun hung low over the sprawling city of Atlanta, casting a warm, golden hue on the glass skyscrapers and the busy streets below. It was one of those rare days when the air felt just right, cool enough to walk in a light jacket, but warm enough that you could feel the promise of summer in your bones. For Tiffany, it was the kind of day that made her feel hopeful, like maybe things were finally turning around. But deep down, she knew better. Life in Atlanta wasn't about hope. It was about survival. At 32, Tiffany had already been through more than most people twice her age. Born in a modest neighborhood on the West Side, she'd grown up with the constant reminder that the world wasn't made for people who looked like her. Black, proud, and unapologetically ambitious. She'd fought tooth and nail to escape the poverty trap, to prove that she was more than just another statistic. And for a long time, she had felt like she was winning. Her rise through the corporate ranks had been nothing short of extraordinary. What started as an entry-level position at one of Atlanta's biggest investment firms had slowly but surely turned into a seat at the table. Tiffany had been carving her own path, showing them all that a black woman could not only survive in these rooms, but thrive. And thrive she did, overseeing multi-million-dollar projects, being a trusted advisor to some of the most influential people in the industry. She'd earned her spot. But the price she had to pay? That was something they didn't tell you about in the brochures. It wasn't just the hours, though the long nights and early mornings were relentless. It wasn't even the stress of keeping up with the demands of her job. No, the hardest part was what came with being a black woman in a sea of corporate white faces. They smiled in her direction, but it was the kind of smile that didn't reach their eyes. Tiffany knew exactly what they thought of her. How did she get here? It wasn't just curiosity. It was disbelief. She wasn't supposed to be here. Not in these circles. Not in these spaces. And then there was her husband, Marcus. He was part of the reason Tiffany had made it this far. His support had been unwavering. But lately, their relationship had been strained, to say the least. Marcus, a well-to-do man from an old money family, had always been by her side in public. But behind closed doors, it was different. Tiffany had begun to sense that Marcus's family didn't see her the way he did. In fact, they'd made it clear from day one that they didn't want her there. It wasn't even subtle. At family gatherings, the side glances, the raised eyebrows, the quiet comments that barely passed for conversation, they all pointed to one undeniable truth. She wasn't good enough for Marcus. Tiffany had always brushed it off. After all, Marcus was hers, and he loved her. But it hurt, it stung. She would never be able to erase the way his mother's cold gaze would follow her around the room, or how his cousins would laugh at jokes that were barely funny, but enough to make her feel small. She wasn't family. She was an outsider, but Tiffany was no stranger to adversity. If she had learned anything from her years of struggle, it was how to hold her own, how to let their ignorance slide off her like water on a duck's back. But that didn't mean it didn't hurt. And now, with the pressure of work mounting, the weight of Marcus's family's disdain was beginning to feel unbearable. Marcus had tried to convince her to just play along, to keep the peace, as his mother liked to say. But peace was a luxury that Tiffany couldn't afford, especially not when she was on the verge of pulling off something monumental. It was a secret she'd been carrying for weeks. Now, an opportunity to invest in a groundbreaking tech company that was set to disrupt the entire industry. It was big, really big. This could be her chance to prove to everyone who ever doubted her that she belonged at the top. But there was a catch. The deal required one thing: the blessing of Marcus's family. Her stomach twisted as she thought about it. She couldn't stand them, couldn't stand their pompous attitudes, their condescending smiles. But if she could secure this investment, if she could show them all that she was capable of building something on her own, without their approval, without their validation, maybe, just maybe, she could finally silence the voices that had been questioning her every step of the way. As she sat at her desk, looking over the investment details, Tiffany couldn't help but feel the weight of what was at stake. If this deal went through, it would change everything. $1 billion investment, a chance to set her own path, to rise above the constraints of her past. But the thought of Marcus's family, the same people who had dismissed her, belittled her, standing in her way, felt like a slap to the face. Yet there was something inside Tiffany that refused to back down. She was tired of playing by their rules. She was tired of waiting for their approval. This was her moment, and no one, not even Marcus's family, was going to take it from her. But she knew it wouldn't be easy. No, this was going to be a battle that would shake the foundations of everything Marcus's family had worked so hard to build. But she was ready. She had to be. She had worked too hard to get here, and she wasn't about to let some rich, entitled relatives tell her what she could and couldn't do. Tiffany leaned back in her chair, staring out the window at the bustling city below. The faint hum of traffic was a constant reminder of how much was at stake. She could already feel the tension rising, the storm that was brewing just beneath the surface. But in that moment, she was resolute. She would fight for this. She would fight for her future. And no one, not even Marcus's family, was going to stand in her way. The day was barely half over, but Tiffany could already feel the tension in the air, thick enough to cut with a knife. She had just finished a back-to-back meeting with investors where she had expertly pitched her idea for the tech investment. She knew she'd nailed it. Her figures were solid, her projections sharp, and her confidence undeniable. But when the meeting ended and the investors filed out of the room, she saw it, a subtle glance. One of the senior partners, a man who had never made eye contact with her for longer than a second, had exchanged a look with one of the other partners. She wasn't sure what was said, but she didn't need to. Tiffany had seen that look 100 times before, the look that said, "She's not one of us." It wasn't overt. It was never loud. But it was always there, lurking behind every conversation, every handshake, every "well done, Tiffany." She didn't flinch. She couldn't, not now. Not when she was so close. But the sharp pang of frustration settled into the pit of her stomach, and she fought hard to ignore it. Her phone buzzed on the table. It was a message from Marcus. "Dinner with my parents tonight. 7:30, can you come?" Tiffany paused before typing her response. He knew how much she hated these dinners. Every time they sat down with his family, she was reminded of how much they didn't want her there. How no matter how successful she was, no matter how many deals she closed, no matter how much she contributed to Marcus's world, she would always be seen as other, as an outsider. But she couldn't back out now. Not when the stakes were so high. "I'll be there," she typed back. It wasn't just about dinner tonight. It was about what Marcus didn't understand. The subtle, insidious ways his family made her feel less than. How his mother, despite all the praises she gave Tiffany's accomplishments, still never fully accepted her. How his brothers would talk down to her as if they were doing her a favor by inviting her to their little dinners. Tiffany couldn't count the number of times she'd overheard them laughing about her in private, calling her exotic or refreshing, like she was some kind of novelty to be admired, not a person worthy of real respect. And that was just the beginning. The way they ignored her ideas in meetings, the way they questioned her every move. Tiffany had learned quickly that being a black woman in a room full of well-to-do white executives meant having to fight for every inch. Every idea she pitched, every plan she laid out, every suggestion she made, it was always met with skepticism at best and outright dismissal at worst. They would question her logic, challenge her assumptions, and second-guess her expertise. Yet, when the same ideas came from one of the men in the room, it was taken as gospel. She had been through it all before, but today was different. Today, she felt something simmering underneath her skin. She was fed up. Tiffany had worked too hard to be treated like a second-class citizen. She was one of the best in the game. She had proven it time and time again, and she wasn't about to let these microaggressions, these backhanded comments, and these subtle dismissals stop her now. That night, as she walked into Marcus's family's grand home, the familiar air of tension settled in around her. It was always the same, grandiose, lavish, and pristine. They lived in a world so detached from Tiffany's that it sometimes felt like she was stepping into a different dimension. Everything about it screamed money, status, and an old-world sense of entitlement. She hated the house, hated the way it made her feel small, insignificant, but she smiled, plastering on the mask she had become so good at wearing. "Hey, everyone," she greeted, her voice light, trying her best to ignore the tightness in her chest. Marcus's mom, Carolyn, was the first to greet her. She smiled that same smile that Tiffany had come to dread, the one that was polite but distant. "Tiffany, darling, so glad you could join us," Carolyn said, her voice smooth as silk, though her eyes always seemed to be calculating. Tiffany offered a polite smile in return. "Of course, Mrs. Lawson, it's always a pleasure." As they made their way to the dining room, Tiffany couldn't help but notice how the conversation shifted as soon as she entered. It was subtle at first. Marcus's brother, Tyler, made a comment about the new restaurant in town, asking her if she'd been there. But when Tiffany answered, talking about the atmosphere and the menu, Tyler's face twitched ever so slightly, like he didn't quite believe she knew what she was talking about. She ignored it, focusing on Marcus, who sat beside her with a look of reassurance in his eyes. But that was the problem. He didn't see it. He didn't notice how his family treated her, how they dismissed her without even realizing it. He just wanted everything to be normal, as if their relationship could function in the bubble they had created for themselves. Dinner was always a game of chess. Carolyn would ask questions, but only the questions that let her guide the conversation in the direction she wanted. "Tiffany, how's work going? Still breaking barriers in that big firm of yours?" she asked, her tone sweet, but with that underlying sharpness. Tiffany clenched her jaw but kept her smile in place. "Yes, things are going really well. I'm working on a big project right now, actually. It's a tech investment with the potential to disrupt the entire industry. We're talking billions." Carolyn raised an eyebrow, and Tiffany saw it, the subtle, barely noticeable flicker of disbelief in her eyes. "Oh, really? That's impressive. I'm sure your team is helping you along, though, right?" she said, the question hanging in the air like a challenge. Tiffany felt the heat rising in her chest, but she kept her composure. "Actually, it's my idea. I'm leading the project. It's been a lot of work, but we're making good progress." Tyler chimed in with a laugh. "Well, I'm sure it's a great idea. You've got the brain for it. But let's be honest, a billion-dollar deal isn't just about having a great idea, right?" He glanced at his father, who nodded, agreeing silently. "You've got to have the right connections, the right support." Tiffany froze. The weight of those words landed like a slap to the face. It was the first time they'd said it outright, suggesting that despite all of her accomplishments, she wasn't equipped to handle this level of business without their help. And she knew exactly what they meant. Without their white privilege, without their old money, without their network. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she didn't let it show. She had learned long ago how to smile through the pain, how to play their game. But this was something else. "Actually, Tyler," Tiffany said, her voice steady, "the support I need is more about the ideas and innovation. You don't need a billion-dollar network when you've got a vision that speaks for itself." The table went silent for a moment. Carolyn's smile faltered just for a second. Tyler looked away, clearly uncomfortable. But the damage was done. As dinner wore on, the tension only grew. Every time Tiffany spoke, every time she shared an idea or opinion, it was met with either condescension or polite disinterest. She could see the wheels turning in their heads, wondering how long it would take before she'd leave. How long it would take before she'd realize that she didn't belong in their world. But Tiffany was done. She was done playing nice. She was done pretending that everything was fine when it was clear to her that they didn't want her there. This dinner was just another reminder of why she couldn't rely on Marcus's family. She could never be good enough for them. When dessert came around, Tiffany stood up, excusing herself from the table. "I think I've had enough for tonight." "Thank you for dinner, Carolyn." Marcus's face was a mix of concern and confusion as he followed her to the door. "Tiff, what's going on? You okay?" She looked him in the eye, her voice low and firm. "I'm done pretending, Marcus. I'm not your family's charity case, and I'm not going to keep fighting for their approval. Not when I've worked my ass off to get where I am." He stood there, speechless, as she walked out, leaving him with a choice: stand by her or stand by them. The next morning, Tiffany couldn't shake the weight of last night's dinner. The look in Marcus's eyes, the confusion, the hurt. It was like a punch to the gut. She'd known this was coming, but she wasn't prepared for how it would feel to have him torn between her and his family. They were all he knew, all he'd grown up with. She was the other, the outsider. Even now, she could almost hear his mom's voice in the back of her head, soft but sharp, whispering about how Tiffany wasn't quite his type. But Tiffany wasn't the type to back down. She never had been. Still, the sense of isolation was overwhelming. She had to remind herself that she wasn't in this fight alone. Not really. She had her team, her contacts, her intellect, but when the world around you constantly reminds you that you're not good enough, not the right skin color, not the right background, it starts to take its toll. It was just a week after the dinner when the consequences of the tension began to show up in her work. Tiffany had pitched the billion-dollar deal to an international investment firm. It was a groundbreaking idea, one that would bring a massive shift to the tech world. She had put in the work, the research, and the passion. The numbers were undeniable. But when she received the rejection email, it felt like a punch in the stomach. She sat in her office, the sleek glass walls reflecting her own tired face. The email was polite, as most rejection emails were. They thanked her for the presentation, acknowledged her effort, but ultimately decided to go in a different direction. Tiffany stared at the screen, reading the words over and over again. There was no reason given. Just that vague, corporate, not the right fit for us at this time. She had seen it before, heard it before. The whitewashed politeness that was meant to cushion the blow, but only made it worse. She slammed her fist on the desk, the frustration boiling over. Not the right fit? She had spent months perfecting this pitch. The research was solid. The potential for growth? Through the roof. What was the real reason? Tiffany couldn't shake the feeling that her race had played a role, that being the only black woman in the room had something to do with it. She wasn't naive. She knew how things worked. She knew how often black women were overlooked in spaces like these. She had read the studies, seen the reports. She'd heard the whispers, how people like her, no matter how accomplished, had to work twice as hard to get half the recognition. That afternoon, she had a meeting scheduled with her assistant, Karen, a young black woman who had worked with her for the past 2 years. Tiffany could see the worry in her eyes as she entered the office, the door clicking shut behind her. "You okay?" Karen asked, hesitating as she glanced at the rejection email still open on Tiffany's screen. Tiffany leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples. It's not fair, Karen. I did everything right. I made the pitch. I put the numbers together. But somehow, it's still not good enough." Karen sat down across from her her voice low but urgent. Tiff, we both know what this is. It's not about your numbers. It's about who you are and what they see when they look at you. You know that. Tiffany's eyes met hers, and for the first time she felt the weight of it all, the constant battle to prove her worth in a world that wasn't built for her. The exhaustion, the isolation, the deep gnawing fear that she would never break through. I know, Tiffany said quietly, but I can't keep fighting this. I can't keep fighting them. It's like I'm invisible, Karen, like they only see me as a token. They're waiting for me to mess up. Karen's gaze softened. That's the thing. You haven't messed up. You're doing everything they said you couldn't. You've built something for yourself. We all see it. You're not invisible to us. But Tiffany wasn't so sure. Her thoughts turned to Marcus again, his confusion, his silence. She had tried to explain it to him, but he just didn't get it. He didn't know what it was like to walk into a room and feel the cold stares. To watch someone else get credit for her ideas, her hard work, her hustle. He didn't understand how it felt to be judged before you even spoke. The phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was from Marcus. We need to talk. Can we meet up later? Tiffany took a deep breath. This conversation was inevitable. It had been building since last night, and yet a part of her dreaded it. She couldn't keep pretending like things were okay when they weren't. When they met later that evening at a small cafe near the office, the air between them was thick with unspoken words. Marcus was already sitting at a table when she arrived, his back stiff, his jaw clenched. Tiff, he began, voice low. I don't get it. I don't understand why you're pushing me away, why you're shutting me out. Tiffany sat down, eyes on him, but her heart was somewhere else entirely. I'm not shutting you out, Marcus. I'm trying to tell you that it's not about you. It's about everything I have to fight against. Every single day. It's about my worth not being seen, not being respected. And every time I try to stand up for myself, I'm made to feel like I'm not enough. He looked away for a moment, rubbing his face. But my family, they don't get it, Tiff. They don't understand. They don't mean to hurt you. They don't have to mean to hurt me, Marcus, Tiffany snapped, her voice shaking. It's the things they say without even realizing it. The things they do. I'm tired of feeling like I'm constantly proving myself, constantly trying to make them see me as a person, not some novelty they can tolerate because of you. Marcus fell silent, his fingers tapping nervously on the table. I'm sorry, Tiffany. I know it's been hard, but I don't know what else to do. I've tried, Tiffany cut him off, her voice cracking. You've tried? No, Marcus. You've avoided it. You've let it slide, let it happen. I've been fighting for my place here, fighting to get my ideas heard, fighting to be seen as worthy, but I can't do it alone. You're either with me or you're not. The weight of her words hung in the air, and for the first time, Marcus truly seemed to see the depth of her pain. She stood up, fighting back the tears that threatened to fall. I need you to choose, Marcus. I need you to see that my fight is not just my own. It's ours, but I can't keep waiting for you to choose. Before he could respond, Tiffany turned and walked out, leaving him with the choice that would define everything. The scene shifted, the suspense rising. Tiffany's phone buzzed again. This time it was an email, but it wasn't just any email. It was from the international firm that had rejected her, an invitation to a follow-up meeting. The stakes had just gotten higher. What had started as a rejection now felt like a turning point. She was going to have to confront not just Marcus's family and the systemic racism that had been eating at her soul for years, but also the demons inside her that had been holding her back from the very beginning. Her future, her survival, depended on the next move. The evening air in Atlanta had a bite to it, sharp enough to make Tiffany shiver, even though she had her jacket pulled tightly around her. But it wasn't the cold that made her feel like she was freezing from the inside out. It was the weight of everything hanging over her head. The rejection, Marcus, the fight for respect that felt like it was never going to end. It had all built to this moment. Her phone buzzed again, this time a text from Marcus. Can we talk? I need you to hear me out. Please. Tiffany stared at the message, her thumb hovering over the screen. She could feel the anger bubbling inside her, the hurt that had been festering for days now. She wanted to ignore him, wanted to walk away and never look back. But there was something deeper, something she couldn't quite explain. Maybe it was the years of love they'd shared, the moments where he'd been there when no one else was. Or maybe it was just the hope that one day he'd get it, that he'd finally understand what it felt like to be her. With a heavy sigh, she typed back, "I'll meet you." 30 minutes. She got into her car and headed toward the cafe where they'd last met. As she drove, her mind spun in 1,000 directions. She thought about her pitch, the one that had gotten rejected so swiftly, without even the courtesy of a real explanation. She thought about the dinner, about how his family had made her feel like she wasn't even worthy of their time, how they had made her feel like a charity case, a trophy on display because they were trying to prove they weren't racist. And then there was Marcus. She wanted to scream at him, to shake him and make him see that her fight wasn't just for herself. It was for every black woman who had ever been told she wasn't good enough, for every person of color who had to work twice as hard just to get half the recognition. When she arrived, Marcus was already sitting at a corner table, his hands clasped in front of him, his face drawn and tired. She couldn't read him anymore. He was a stranger, someone who had once been her closest ally, now just another face in the crowd of people who had failed to see her. "Tiff," he started, his voice thick with something like guilt. No, Tiffany cut him off, her voice like ice. "I don't want to hear it, Marcus. You've had weeks to figure this out. I'm done listening to your excuses. I'm done waiting for you to get it." His face twisted in frustration, and she could see the anger in his eyes. "I'm trying, Tiffany. I swear I'm trying. I know what my family's done, and I don't want to be like them. But you are them," Tiffany spat, her heart pounding. "You can't even see it. You've let them treat me like I'm invisible, like I'm some damn experiment for them to poke at and figure out. Do you have any idea what it feels like to sit in that room and know they don't respect me? That they don't think I belong?" He flinched at the words, his face hardening. "That's not fair, Tiffany. You know they don't mean it like that." "Don't mean it?" she shouted, her voice rising now, the walls around her closing in. She stood up, her hands shaking, the anger and frustration overwhelming. "Don't mean it? Marcus, do you know what it's like to walk into a room and feel every single pair of eyes on you, sizing you up, deciding if you're good enough? Do you know what it's like to fight for every single inch of respect, to fight to be seen as worthy of being here? No, you don't, and you never will. Not unless you start seeing me, Marcus. Really seeing me." Tears burned her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She wasn't going to break down in front of him. She had spent so many years holding it together, pretending it didn't hurt, pretending she didn't feel like the world was designed to keep her down. But Marcus wasn't getting it. He was still sitting there, trying to argue, trying to explain himself, trying to make her see that he was on her side. But his side wasn't enough. Not anymore. Tiffany took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "I'm done, Marcus. I'm done trying to make you understand. Because you don't. You don't get it, and I can't keep fighting this fight alone. I've spent too many years carrying this burden. I'm not doing it anymore." Marcus stood up now, a mixture of anger and desperation in his eyes. "Don't do this, Tiff. Don't walk away, please." But Tiffany shook her head, a sad smile tugging at her lips. "I'm not walking away, Marcus. I'm walking toward something better, toward something that actually sees me, something that actually believes in me." The words hit him like a slap, and for a moment he was silent. His face turned pale, his mouth opening and closing as though he didn't know what to say. She knew he was trying to process everything, trying to find a way to make it all right, to fix what was broken. But Tiffany had stopped believing in that fantasy. She had stopped believing that she needed someone else's validation to be worthy. She had her own worth, her own fight, and that was enough. Without saying another word, Tiffany turned and walked out of the cafe, leaving Marcus standing there, powerless to stop her. The sound of the door closing behind her echoed in her ears, and for a brief moment everything felt unreal, like she was walking away from the only life she had known. But then, she stepped into the cold night air, and the reality hit her. This was it. This was the point of no return. Her phone buzzed in her pocket again. It was an email notification, one that made her stop dead in her tracks. She pulled it up, her heart sinking as she read the subject line. Follow-up meeting, billion-dollar investment opportunity. She hadn't expected this. Not like this, the email didn't waste any time. It was a straightforward invitation, but what made her stomach churn was the name on the signature line, Opportunity, Marcus Lawson. On behalf of Lawson Enterprises. Tiffany felt the ground beneath her feet shift. This wasn't just a business opportunity. This wasn't just about tech investments anymore. This was Marcus, using his family's name to make sure the deal happened. He had finally picked a side. And it wasn't hers. Her heart twisted, not because of the betrayal, but because the realization hit her like a ton of bricks. Marcus hadn't understood her fight. He hadn't seen how much she had given up, how much she had sacrificed to get here. And now, his family, his empire, was trying to stake a claim on her success to make it theirs. Her hands trembled as she read the email again. The fight wasn't over. In fact, it had just begun. The cold wind in the city streets felt sharper now, the chill biting at Tiffany's skin as she stood in the middle of it all, lost in thought, but still very much aware of the world around her. The neon lights reflected off the puddles in the street, and the hum of traffic seemed distant, as if the city was moving in a different time zone. She wasn't sure if it was the weight of Marcus's betrayal, the email from his family, or just the crushing reality that no matter how far she'd come, the world wasn't going to make it easy for her. But she felt like she had just stepped out of a battle, only to realize the war was far from over. Tiffany wasn't sure where she was headed, but she knew she couldn't go back. Not to Marcus. Not to a world where her worth was always questioned, where her success felt like a prize to be won by someone else. She couldn't keep playing by their rules. She had tried. She had tried to make them see her, really see her. But every time she fought for a seat at the table, they pushed her further away. She was the outsider, the other. And the truth was, she had spent too long trying to prove herself to people who would never understand. But as she walked down the busy street, her mind racing, something began to settle within her. The pain was real. The betrayal stung. But this was her life now, her fight. And it was a fight that didn't just belong to her, but to everyone who had ever been told they weren't good enough, who had ever been dismissed or minimized because of who they were or where they came from. Tiffany had always known this fight would be bigger than herself, but now it was clear that the world was at a tipping point. She wasn't the only one standing on the edge, looking out over the landscape of systemic racism and injustice. There were so many others, black women, black men, people of color, who had spent their lives facing barriers, climbing walls that no one else could see. And now, as the fight for equality and fairness was more visible than ever, Tiffany realized something profound. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for everyone who had ever been left behind, forgotten or told they couldn't. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Karen. "Tiff, I know it's been rough, but don't lose yourself. We see you. We need you." Karen's words were a lifeline. Tiffany had spent so many years trying to get validation from the wrong people, the ones who had all the power but none of the understanding. It was easy to get lost in that. It was easy to let the system break you down until you believed you weren't enough. But Karen's message reminded her that there were people who saw her, who knew the real fight. It wasn't about Marcus or his family. It wasn't about fitting into their world. It was about carving out a space where she didn't have to explain herself or ask for permission to exist. As she made her way home, Tiffany felt a sense of clarity wash over her. She had been given an opportunity to change the game, to break the mold, to rise above the constraints placed on her by a society that still struggled to accept her. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. It was going to be messy, brutal even, but it was hers. And that was something she could control. The next day, Tiffany walked into her office with a new sense of purpose. Her team noticed it immediately, the way she carried herself, the fire in her eyes. She wasn't the same person who had been quietly battling for respect. No, she was something different now, something stronger. "All right, team," she said, standing in front of the conference room, her voice steady and commanding. We're going to push forward with the investment deal, but we're doing it on our terms. We're not going to wait for validation from anyone. We're not going to sit at a table where we're only tolerated. We're going to build something that doesn't rely on anyone else's approval. We're going to do it our way. Her team, made up of people who had seen her rise from the very bottom, looked at her with a mix of awe and admiration. They knew this wasn't just about the deal anymore. This was about something bigger. This was about taking control of their own narrative. Tiffany wasn't going to let anyone tell her what she could and couldn't do. Not anymore. It wasn't long before Tiffany reached out to the investors who had initially rejected her. She knew what they had done. She knew why they had dismissed her. But she wasn't going to let them off the hook. Not when she had something to prove. She scheduled a follow-up meeting, this time on her terms. She walked in with confidence, her head held high, and presented her pitch again, this time with an undeniable edge. She wasn't just asking for their approval, she was demanding it. And the results? Well, they spoke for themselves. The deal that had once seemed out of reach was now within her grasp. The same firm that had turned her away sent a follow-up email a week later. We've reconsidered your proposal, and after further discussion, we would like to move forward with the investment. But it wasn't just about the deal. It wasn't even about the money. Tiffany knew that securing this investment wasn't just a personal victory. It was a victory for every black woman who had ever been told she couldn't. For every person who had been excluded, left out, or silenced. It was a reminder that change was possible. It was proof that resilience, persistence, and self-worth could shatter the walls that had been built to hold people back. As Tiffany looked out over the city from her office window, she thought about the road ahead. She knew there would be more battles, more obstacles. She knew that racism wasn't going to disappear overnight. But for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel so alone in the fight. She didn't feel like she had to fight on behalf of a world that refused to see her. Now, she was fighting for herself and for everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. Tiffany made a vow to herself. She wasn't just going to succeed. She was going to make sure that when the next person came along, they wouldn't have to fight as hard. The system needed to change, and she was going to help lead the way. The battle wasn't over, but now she had the tools to keep fighting. She looked down at her phone as it buzzed once again. It was Marcus. "Tiff, I know I've messed up. I see it now. Can we talk?" Tiffany thought about it for a moment. She had once hoped he would be the one to understand, to stand beside her. But now the truth was clear. Her journey wasn't about him. It was about everyone else. It was about fighting for the ones who had been left behind. She put the phone down, letting it buzz unanswered. Some things, she knew, were worth more than a conversation. The fight for equality, for justice, for dignity. It was something bigger than any one relationship, and Tiffany, at last, was ready to lead it. Call to action, haunting question. The road ahead isn't easy. But what if we stopped pretending that systemic racism doesn't exist? What if we all started questioning the way we've been conditioned to accept inequality? What would happen if every person, black, white, brown, refused to sit silently in the face of injustice? Tiffany's fight isn't over, and neither is ours.